Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. The second letter in the correspondence between Heloise and Abelard is by Heloise, and she is starting up a conversation with Abelard after she has read a letter that wasn't addressed to her but had mentioned her at a number of points circulating around. And she tells us within the first few pages that reading this letter has brought up, as she's going to say, the remembrance of past evils. It's never completely forgotten, but, she says, I was surprised to find this whole letter filled with a particular and melancholy account of our misfortunes, and, it's bringing everything to her mind now. So she says, I reproached myself for having been so long without venting my sorrows when the rage of our unrelenting enemies still burns with the same fury. They're all still engaged in that. You're writing letters. Why shouldn't I also be doing this as well? And she suggests that by mingling her sighs with his, maybe she can make his sufferings less, if the observation is true that sorrows divided are made lighter. And so she's going to go on and then talk about why letter writing is a good idea. And she's proposing that they write letters back and forth. So she's going to bring up the example of a Stoic philosopher who they had studied together, Seneca, who writes letters to Lucilius. It's probably one of his most famous works. And she says that, he was a Stoic, so you would expect him not to be particularly moved by emotion. But we know that he seemed to be sensible of this kind of pleasure that on opening any letters from Lucilius, he imagined he felt the same delight as when they conversed together. And that is indeed in some of those letters, as well as being discussed to a certain degree in some of his other work. So she is suggesting, we could do what they're doing. And she says, let's think about this in terms of what letters allow a person. So start with thinking about pictures. She says, we're much fonder of the pictures of those we love when those people are at a great distance than when they're near to us. Why? Because when they're here, well, we don't need pictures of them. We can see them. But the picture is a kind of substitute and not just a resemblance of them, but a certain way of being connected with them. She says the resemblance allows our imagination, figuring them to us by the desire we have of seeing them again, makes us think so. So love can make that seem life itself, which as soon as the loved object, the person, returns, is nothing but canvas and dead colors. I have your picture in my room. Every time I pass by it, I stop to look at it. Then she says, if a picture, which is just a mute representation of an object, can give this sort of pleasure, what can letters do? Letters go beyond a mere picture. They have souls, she says. They can speak. They have in them all that force which expresses the transports of the heart. They have all the fire of our passions. They can raise them as much as if the persons themselves were present. They have all the softness and delicacy of speech, sometimes a boldness of expression, even beyond it. And then she suggests that there's still happiness available for them as a married couple. She says, we may write to each other, so innocent a pleasure is not forbidden us. Let us not lose through negligence the only happiness which is left us, and the only one perhaps which the malice of our enemies cannot ravish from us. I shall read, you are my husband. You shall see me address you as a wife. So even though they've taken religious vows, even though they're in separate places, he's in a monastery, she's in a convent, they are still married. They can still be husband and wife through their letters. And she says, letters were first invented for comforting solitary wretches as myself. Having lost the pleasures of seeing and possessing you, I will in some measure compensate this loss by the satisfaction I will find in your writing. There, I will read your most secret thoughts. I will carry them about with me. I shall kiss them every moment. If you are capable of any jealousy, let it be for the caresses I will bestow on your letters. And then she also says, write me carelessly, without taking care, without study. Just write me whatever you're thinking of. I want to know what's in your heart, not so much the products of your brain. And so she is telling him that this is still available for them, a way of being connected as a set of lovers who are bound by marriage. She also goes on and says, you owe this to me. You wrote your friend who's not doing well this wonderful letter. Don't you owe me more than you owe him? Right? Whatever the friendship between you was, we're more important than that. And then she talks about her sisters. Abelard has a duty to write to the nuns that she is in charge of. She says, you used to live here, you've given fame and function to a place, and you've made a den of thieves the house of prayer. So you kind of have an obligation to those who are now inhabiting it. And she says, we're weak women. Virtue is grafted upon nature and the woman in us. The one is weak, the other always changeable. You need to take care of that by writing us. This should be an example for your conduct towards us. And then she says, you could do that for me too. Is it possible I should fear obtaining anything from you when I ask it in my own name? It's one thing to write to the nuns, it's another to write to me. If Augustine and Tertullian and Jerome wrote to Eudoxus, Paulus, and Melanius, clear precedence, why can't you remember me and write to me? Why should I only reap no advantage from your learning? When you write to me, you will write to your wife. And she says, marriage has made such a correspondence lawful. If we were a monk and a nun who, were not married before, maybe somebody could raise some problems about that. But in this case, this is exactly what we ought to be doing. She says, you can, without giving the least scandal, you can satisfy me. Why won't you? And she goes on and says that, I have particular motives for that. Can't you remember what pleasure I have in past days hearing your discourse? How when you were absent, I shut myself from everyone to write to you? I'm no longer ashamed that my passion has no bounds for you. I actually hated myself so I could love you. I took religious vows for you. I entered this nunnery. I don't want to be here. I want to be with you. But you insisted on it, and out of love for you, I did that. And she says, nothing but virtue, joined to a love perfectly disengaged from the commerce of the senses, could have produced that effect. It's not because I liked having sex with you. It's not because I wanted any honors. I love you, and that is what I want. So she talks about loving the person, not just the man. Her uncle had her lover and husband castrated so that they couldn't enjoy, conjugal love anymore. She's saying, I don't just love you as a man, the wounded man, the emasculated man. I love the person. That is you, Abelard. And I always have. And she says, I love you with all the tenderness of my soul to the last moment of my life. If formerly my affection for you was not so pure, in those days the mind and the body shared in the pleasure of loving you, I told you even back then I was more pleased with possessing your heart than any other happiness. And the man was the thing I least valued in you. I want you, Abelard. And so she goes on and she says, I actually was perfectly fine with just being your mistress and not being married, but the bonds of matrimony bear with them a necessary engagement. And I took that on because you wanted it. You are still married to me. And then she goes on and she tells us that true love, a real affection for a person, as she's going to say, separates the lover, Abelard, from all things that are external to him, setting aside his quality, fortune, and employments to consider him singly by himself. So she goes on and says, a lot of other women, they're interested in riches, they're interested in honor, ambition, not affection. I want the pleasures of an affectionate union. And I want those secret and charming emotions of the hearts that have long striven to be united. And she goes on to say, if there's anything which can be properly be called happiness here below, not in heaven, but here for us earthly human beings, I'm persuaded it is in the union of two persons who love each other with perfect liberty, who are united by a secret inclination and satisfied with each other's merit. Their hearts are full and leave no vacancy for any other passion. They enjoy perpetual tranquility because they enjoy content. So she's saying this is really the best thing that people can have. And you and I can still have that, Abelard. We don't have to have sex. We don't even have to be in the same place. We can do this through you writing letters to me. And then she goes on and says, you were able to compose all sorts of verses. I know you're capable of this. And then she talks about her misery. She says, I now lament my lover, and of all my joys here remains nothing but the painful remembrance, but that they are past. And then she says, why are you neglecting me? I took vows for you, and then you just kind of went off and left me here. Nothing moved me to it but your disgrace, nor did I give any consent but yours. Let me hear what is the occasion of your coldness, or give me leave to tell you now my opinion. Were you just wanting to have sex? Was it just a temporary tenderness? Did your manhood being taken away mean you couldn't love me anymore? What is going on? And she says, I think I know what it is. It's natural to avoid those to whom we've been too much obliged, and uncommon generosity produces neglect rather than acknowledgement. So what is this? What is she referring to? Taking religious vows because of his jealousy after he was castrated. She doesn't want to do that any more than she wanted to get married, but she did that for him, and then she does the next thing for him. She gets married, she becomes religious, and she's saying, I did this all for you. I can understand why you might feel that's a lot. So she is then going to talk about in being professed, she's going to call this the secret of her call. In taking the vows, she is taking vows to God, but she vowed no more than to be yours, Abelard's only, and I obliged myself voluntarily to a confinement in which you desired to place me. So she did that for him, and she says, did I do this for nothing? If you don't actually love me after all of this, I threw everything away in taking these vows. If you don't continue your concern for me, if I lose your affection, what have I gained from my imprisonment, she tells him. What recompense can I hope for? then she's going to go on and effectively give him a dilemma. There's this great phrase that we're going to see. But before that, there's a lead up. She says, I reproach myself for my own faults. I accuse you for yours. What's the point in all of this? I feel more strongly what power a long habitual passion, that is love, has over my heart. I'm conquered by my inclination. My love troubles my mind and disorders my will. I can't just be a good nun the way these other nuns are here because I love you, Abelard. She says, sometimes I'm swayed by sentiments of piety which arise in me. The next moment, I yield up my imagination to all that is amorous and tender. So she's wavering, very much like, say, Augustine in the garden, right? And she goes on and says, yield either to pity or love. Now, she's not actually framing it as a dilemma, and she's using this as an appeal to him, but I think we could actually reformulate it. She's telling him, listen, I got to go one way or the other. What I really, really want from you, Abelard, is for you to show me that you do love me. Let's write letters back and forth as lovers. We're not going to write erotica. We're not going to just recall all the things we did. We are going to be as a married couple at a distance who've both taken religious vows because that is okay. That is allowable. And that's the best thing that we could have. But if you can't do that, then take pity on me. If you don't have love anymore, then I need you to actually step up and do what you ought to do. She says, when we lived happy together, you might have made it doubt whether pleasure or affection united me more to you, but the place from which I'm writing to you must now have entirely taken away that doubt. I really love you. Though I've lost my lover, I still preserve my love. And without offending against the commands of this perpetual imprisonment, permit a lover to exhort me to live in obedience to your rigorous rules. If you're not going to love me as you should, as I'm offering you, then give me spiritual counsel. Help me, write me for that reason, but you have to write me. And she says, teach me the maxims of divine love in that case. Teach me how to be a good nun, how to be a good Christian, and that will be a way of being a friend to me, a benefactor. We won't be lovers the way I want us to be, but we can still be good. And she goes on and says at the end, do not forget me. Remember my love, my fidelity, my constancy. Love me as your mistress. Cherish me as your child, your sister, your wife. Consider that I still love you and strive to avoid loving you. What a word, what a design is this. I shake with horror and my heart revolts against what I say. I will blot all my paper with tears. I end my long letter wishing you, if you can desire it. So she's posing him this opportunity, this dilemma, and saying, you now do have to actually go one way or the other, and that will enable me to go one way or the other in what remains of my life here as a nun in this convent who's still married to you.